As we progress into our theme, we spoke of acquiring that neutral perspective, stepping back slightly and looking at things for what they are worth. Let us begin with narrating a hadith from Al-Kafi. Imam Sadiq Salamullah alayhi states, he states that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created intellect from the right-hand side of his mighty throne. He looked at the intellect and he said to the intellect, retreat, it did so. And he said to the intellect, advance, and it did so. Allah stated to the intellect, I have not created a creation worthier than you. Through you I shall be acknowledged. Through you I shall complete the purpose, or to that effect, and through you I shall reward. Then on the left-hand side of the throne he created ignorance. He said to the ignorance, retreat, it did so. He said to the ignorance, advance, it did not. It refused. Allah then adorned intellect with 1,000 beautiful qualities. Bravery, wisdom, magnanimity, charitable nature, so on and so forth. Anything and everything that is befitting or that can be conceived as something that completes an individual. At this point, ignorance looked towards God and said to God, I am the twin of intellect. Adorn me with the same. And God adorned ignorance with the opposing qualities with which he had adorned intellect. Now here, when we look at this hadith, we say to ourselves, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created ignorance. Ignorance does not appear to be lack of knowledge. It does not at all appear to be lack of knowledge. It is something quite different. When we look at this hadith, we begin to understand that no, there is something that is going on that has gone amiss. We haven't understood at all. Ignorance, intellect, heaven, hell, Adam, Iblis, Al-Mahdi, Dajjal, all of these have their rightful place in existence. All of these are serving beautiful purposes. But we can only understand that when we step back and look at things for what they are worth. Now when we look at ignorance in the rightest manner, ignorance does not appear to be lack of knowledge at all. Just as death is not the lack of life, it is not the opposite of life. It may be denied certain aspects of physical life that we enjoy, but it is not the contrary of life. Life is ability and discretion and perception. Death is not the lack of perception at all. It is a heightened sense of perception. In fact, that is a greater life in that sense. But it lacks some of the qualities of physical life. In this way, when we look at ignorance, we find that no, it is not in the way that we understand an opposite of intellect. For ignorance itself is contrasting intellect. If intellect is knowledge, then by Allah, the greatest disbelievers were most learned. And at the prime of them all is Iblis himself. Can anyone say that Iblis lacked in any way whatsoever? He did not lack. In fact, he understood those gems of Tawheed that are denied even to the best of the sons of Adam. Yet, he is aligned with the ignorant. When we look deeply and very, very closely into the matter, it appears that no, intellect and ignorance are two different things altogether. These are two realities of human existence. These are the two poles in which we are existing or struggling between. These are depicted by two sides of the same coin. In fact, ignorance is not lack of knowledge at all. It is an attitude towards knowledge or attitude towards life as a whole. Intellect is a particular form of an outlook, state of being. And as opposed to that, there is ignorance. So if intellect is this compliance with Allah, if ignorance is compliance with Allah, Allah says retreat, it does so. Allah says advance, it does so. Then ignorance is non-compliance with Allah. Ignorance, therefore, most accurately is a state of arrogance. Whereas intellect is a state of wholesome submission. This is what it is all about. Think about this example that I'm going to give, and then we advance into the theme and develop it. Dajjal, when we look at him and read the descriptions of Dajjal, he appears to be an extremely advanced state of mind. Dajjal is not ignorant in the sense of lacking knowledge. Dajjal is someone who is vested with a lot of knowledge. Think about it. We are told that he will be riding a donkey who, with its 4 strides, will cross the whole world. Now, you know, we don't find donkeys that long, do we? I mean, we all know that. So it must be a means of travel. Obviously, it shows a very advanced state. And then we are told that Dajjal will sustain his people without any restriction. It shows economic might, for example. Dajjal seems to be a very, very advanced state of being. Yet, Dajjal is aligned with ignorance. When Einstein split the atom, we were faced with 2 choices. One was the messianic and Mahdi choice of providing light, energy, and life to the people. That was a choice of the intellect. And the other one was to dominate people by putting fear into their hearts and killing people, which was the Dajjalic choice. Intellect acts towards giving life progression, and ignorance acts towards destruction and confining things. So most accurately, ignorance is a state of arrogance, whereas intellect is a state of submission and a state of willful obedience to Allah, wholesomeness, which brings about beautiful progression and growth. Now, if we look at this, then that makes life easier for us to understand that when we are born into this world, obviously we are born in limitations. We are immediately conditioned by our immediate surrounding, by our domestic atmosphere, by our communities, by our religions. These are the restrictions that are imposed upon us. However, the inner being asks for liberation, wanting the fullness of their existence. It's quite amazing that we are in limited, fixed boundaries, and we yearn the unlimited. And this is the story of everything that exists in this world. And somebody like Ibn Arabi would say this is a reflection of the 2 faces of God. Allah doesn't have faces, but this is how he depicts it. 2 aspects of God. One is the transcendent aspect. There is nothing like him, huwa hu. Lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. And the other aspect is aynama kuntum. Aynama tawajju fasamma wajhullah. Aynama tawallu fasamma wajhullah. And aynama kuntum. Huwa ma'akum aynama kuntum. He is with you wherever you are. Wherever you turn, you will see his face. The other one is the immanent state of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we find him in every state, in a restricted state. That's the one aspect. And the other aspect is the one of wanting utmost growth. It's amazing, the story of the world. We are born in limitations and we yearn the unlimited. So now, when we are born in restrictions. But our struggle is towards the unrestricted, the absolute, the beautiful completion of ourselves. What the Prophet did was, when he came to his community, he saw that because they are so involved in their lives, in their cultures, they can't see beyond it. Whatever is given to them is analyzed within their limited perspectives. This is a state of arrogance. Because arrogance does not allow for the other to be acknowledged. I am me, this is my view. Why does the Prophet say that when somebody praises you, throw dust on them? Why? Because when you praise me, which is highly unlikely, but when you do praise me once in a while, I become complacent. I become pleased with myself. That brings about stagnation within me. Or that beautiful story of Rumi. Oh no, Sa'di, in his Gulistan, in which he states that a man took his child by the hand to the mosque at the time of the night prayers. And the child looked at the people who were asleep in the mosque. Of course, not like these mosques. Masjid Kufa or Medina or Makkah, something like that. Here people would freeze to death. And the child said, "Oh father, look at these people, they are asleep." The father turned to the child and he said, "Oh child, had you been asleep on this night, it would have indeed been better than your wakefulness. Because you have become conceited. And through your conceit, there is stagnation within you. When we are within limited perspective, anything given to us will be analyzed in accordance with that perspective. Can you see that? For a person who presumes the earth to be flat, any knowledge of cosmology that is supplied to that person will be analyzed in accordance with the context of the earth being flat. Christianity, when it proclaimed the supremacy of human beings based on the centrality of the earth within the universe, analyzed its cosmos based on that value. Even the great Orafa and the Sufis, no one has escaped this wrath. This wrath in which we are born. Allahu Akbar. It is a blessing if we can understand it. It is a calamity if we don't understand it. Even the great Orafa and the Sufis, one of the greatest is Ibn Arabi, the grand doctor. If you look at his cosmology, it is totally off. He doesn't understand cosmology. Now we are saying, for him it is claimed that he got divine inspiration and he was taught by Khidr himself. Khidr could not teach him a proper understanding of cosmology. And anything that Ibn Arabi would see of the world, he would analyze it in his school of thought of divine emanation. No, divine manifestation and sequential descents of God. Everything had to fit in that model of thought. Similarly, a philosopher of a peripatetic leaning would analyze everything in accordance with his rationalistic school of thought. Illuminationist would do the same. A businessman would analyze the entirety of what is given to him in business or commerce terms. An architect in terms of his own profession. This is the way we are. When the Prophet came, he realized this, that these people are immersed in their cultures, are immersed in their lives to the extent that they can't acquire a neutral perspective to see the worth of things as they are. So the first thing he did was, he brought them out of that situation, brought them to a place of neutrality, and he said, now look at these things. Sa'di again, I think, or Maulana, he gives this example, that there was a king with his slave. Their ship was wrecked. The only two survived in a small boat in a vast ocean. The king looked at his slave, and the slave was shivering through the fear of the vast ocean. What the king did was, he took the slave and dipped him inside the water, brought him out and put him back into the boat. The slave stopped shivering. The moral is that the slave did not understand the safety of the boat being within the limited context of the boat. He changed his context, brought him back, and he appreciated. He could see things very differently. So the first thing the Prophet did was, he actually brought people out. And he said, now look at things for what they are worth. See them for what they are worth. Acknowledge that killing of children is wrong. Acknowledge that inhumane qualities, practices are wrong. Once they acknowledged, what happened was that a very different world opened up before them. Otherwise, their whole life was the sand and the gods of the Kaaba and superstition. He brought them out of it all, and he said, look at all of these things from a neutral perspective. Now let's give an example that philosophers normally give. There was a king in the Persian Empire, and when they conquered many regions, they found very different cultures of people. So he noticed that there was a culture in which people would consume the bodies of their dead. Why? Because that was the best way of venerating their dead and respecting their dead, by eating their flesh, especially the renowned. And then he saw that there was another culture in which people used to burn their dead. Why? Because that was the greatest gesture of respect to a dead person, to burn them, so that they do not decay, so that foul smell does not emit from them. What he did was, on a particular occasion, people had died from both camps. He brought both of them together in front of him. He said to the people who burned their dead, he said to them, eat your dead. And those who ate their respected elders' bodies, he said to them, you burn. Both of them were appalled. They said, how can we disrespect our dead to this extent? At that point he understood that there was no value in eating or in burning. There was no value in any of these things. Can you see that? It's a massive thing to arrive at. That when we arrive at a neutral position, from a neutral perspective, if we see things for what they are worth, it becomes a different world altogether. We begin to see things for what they are. We begin to value human practices. We begin to see limitations. We begin to see similarities. It becomes a different world altogether, a world that we begin to understand. Now, me and you, obviously we frown at the Hindus for burning their dead, don't we? Let's be true to this. Do we or don't we? But they frown at us. They say, well, you've put your mother inside a grave. She will decay. The creatures of the grave will eat her body. Is that what you want? How much difference is there between the two in that sense? Think about it. It requires a very free man to be able to see things from a neutral perspective. Of course, we know the value, and I've been told this from yesterday, that to tie the loose ends up. We know from our Sharia law that burying is the right thing to do. Why? Because there are many hidden factors that we don't understand. One of them is that if you look at it properly, the developing fetus, the law of the prohibition of killing becomes absolute at the time of the inception of the soul. And that is the time where we find that they have potential rationality. So it's directly connected with the gray matter inside the head. And we feel, some of us, that the decaying body has still a connection with a finer person that has emerged from it. And therefore it is right to let it decay naturally so that the process of emergence can complete itself. So it would be a disservice to a dead person to burn it abruptly. It would be better for a dead person to bury the dead person so that the process of growth continues beautifully. That is one of the insights that the Sharia provides us with. But on the level of emotions, when we look, we will see it doesn't make any difference, and this emotional input is entirely from us. There is nothing of emotion to do with any of the practices that we conduct. Unfortunately, our lives are spent in the clutches of limited perspectives and this emotional input.